Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Marla Gamron, as all of you on this call know. Our Hatagid host Nir was not able to be with us today because of a family emergency, but I just want to acknowledge and thank Hatagid for sponsoring and organizing these lectures. Hatagid is an Israeli government-funded research center created through legislation as the Ethiopian Heritage Center of Israel. Hatagid is the central repository of knowledge for the study and dissemination of information on Ethiopian culture and heritage in Israel. I'm having some kind of a echo. If everybody could please mute their I'm going to mute everybody, or please mute. If everybody could just please mute yourselves, that would be really helpful. And then I think that's improving our, we don't have the echo. So let me now turn over to just introducing our speaker. We're still having the echo. If everybody could please mute yourselves, that would be really helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to say that in planning for these lectures, Nir and I talked about a lot of angles of how we wanted to help present the Ethiopian Israeli community. And we thought it would be especially enlightening to focus on different perspectives of the experience through the personal stories of three people who represent different generations and experiences of Ethiopians in Israel. And for those of you, can you please mute? Please mute. Somebody is unmute. Please mute. Thank you. It was a particular interest to me that we heard not only from the generation of Ethiopian Israelis who made Aliyah themselves, whether as adults or children, but from the second generation of the Ethiopian community in Israel. And today's speaker, Moria Tadela, is not only a second generation Ethiopian Israeli, but she has researched the impact of secondary traumatization among her generation of Ethiopian Jews. I'm honored and delighted to present today's speaker, Moria Tadela. She was born and raised in the north of Israel. Her parents came to Israel from Ethiopia via Sudan as part of Operation Moshe, Operation Moses. And in that very traumatic journey, they lost 3 children. Moria graduated with honors from Haifa University with a master's degree for her research about the long-term psychological consequences of the journey and the difficult integration in Israel, especially for her generation. The phenomenon she researched is called secondary traumatization in the research literature, and we have the privilege and honor of hearing her story and her research to help us get a deeper sense of the amazing story of the Ethiopian community in Israel. So I'm recording the lecture. I would ask you to use the chat if you have a question. We will do question and answer at the end. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you can chat me or email me and I'll try and monitor. So Moria, it's you.
Hi, good morning or evening, everyone. Thank you, Marla. I'm happy and proud to be here to talk to you about my journey, my parent journey. So I would like to share the presentation. Everybody can see it?
Yes. Right now, it hasn't started the slideshow. We're just seeing the slides. It hasn't started the show yet.
It's okay like this?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. You can see me as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, like Marla said, I was born and raised in Israel. My parents came via Sudan, and in my master degree, I decided to research their story and how it reflects and affects my life, my ability to have like close relationships, and how I perceive and my generation perceive our parents' trauma. So my parents went through this journey via Sudan to come to Israel. Before they decided to come to Israel, they lost already 3 children in Ethiopia. They had 9 children, and they lost 3 children in Ethiopia, then lost another 3 children in Sudan. So it's 6 children that my siblings that my parents told me that I didn't know. And then I could understand their behaviors, their anxiety, why they call me every time I go out my house. And I realized a lot of things as growing up. I didn't realize it as a child. They told me their story when I was like 6 or 7. I couldn't understand it yet and understand their behavior. There were a lot of anger, a lot of frustration when I saw my parents didn't trust me or are never very happy. And I thought that it's because we are Black people in a white country, and they can't talk the language that I talk, that we talk, and we were different. But as growing up, I understood. Now as a mother, I absolutely understand, but then I could understood the anxiety, why they always asking me questions that it's like they didn't trust me. But after I grew up, I understand that they don't trust the world. They don't trust that if I go out my house, I will come back. And all this realization came as I grew up. And then when I started my bachelor degree, I chose to do it in the education faculty. Then I learned I learned about the parents that lost their children and post-traumatic syndromes and all these things that I could connect it to what I saw in my house. I could understand it. I could understand more what my parents are feeling. And then I decided to do the research. My parents come from a village called Ambovel. It's a village in Gondar area where Jewish people lived. My father worked like you can see in the picture. He worked outside the house. My mom was on the house having children. A patriarchal family, like all families in the village. And I remember one day my brother was telling me about the arriving in Israel. He told me they didn't even know what toilet is. Like they thought the toilet will suck them in. They were so traumatic arriving here in Israel and see so many people that are so different from them and seeing technology. And this picture can show us a little bit the life that they had there and the difference between the life there and the life they have here. So my research assumed that the generation of my parents not only have post-traumatic syndrome because of what they experienced during the Aliyah, but also the trauma of arriving here, that is a country so different of Ethiopia, and with people that they didn't even know exist. Like they didn't know there are white Jews. They didn't know what a car is. So many differences that can, a person is struggling to adapt to these changes. So as I said, the purpose of this talk is to discuss the story of the immigration of Ethiopian Jews and their harsh experiences following their arrival in Sudan. This is a part of an attempt to present the heroic story of Operation Moises to honor and commemorate its victims. Secondly, to discuss the finding on the long-term consequences experienced by the second generation to date, as it's shown in the research. This is some historical facts. I know in this point, many people have questioned about my family history and things that I went through maybe before we continue to the research. So if someone have any questions, I will love to answer. Marla?
I don't have any questions yet. I think there will be questions as we move forward. And so
Okay.
might require you to go back in time to the beginning of the lecture, but I think it's okay to just to speak. Thank you.
Okay. So in the early 1980s, after long years of exile, the Ethiopian community began immigrating to Israel through Sudan. The first mass exodus as part of Operation Moises was characterized by escape because of Ethiopia's political situation at the time. This is part of Avraham Adege book about this topic. So one day they had to take all of his stuff very, very quickly. They didn't have a plan, like specific plan how they will do it, but they just, I always ask my parents, did you just stand up and start walking? And they tell me, yes, we had the strong faith that God is with us. And there was a rumor in the village that it's been, a route is open to, and someone is waiting for them. Israeli people is waiting for them in Sudan. So let's go. So they went, pregnant women, elderly people, children, they all just started walking to Sudan. As my parents said, I know many, like the belief is that many people died due to this journey. But until they arrived in Sudan. But my family tell that not many people died from this road walking to Sudan. Most people died because of the waiting. They wait in refugee camps in Sudan. My parents waited in Amarakuba. It's called Amarakuba. And the waiting and the people who waited there, I ate food that was, they say it was poison. I think it was like, I don't really understand what they say many times, my parents, about Sudan, but they say that who walked in hospitals that was there never get out alive. So many people died there, and they had to hide the fact that they are Jews. So when they bury the people, they had to do it in night. They had to silence their tears, and people died like every day. There were between 20 and 25 people dying. My father tells that he himself buried 22 people in one day. So in that camp, my parents lost 3 kids. Like I said, one in 8 years old. Her name was Teguada. One boy, 4 years old. His name was Tamrat, and one baby of 1 year old named Banchi Amlak. And my parents always talked about them and told me how there's a difference between the 3 children they lost in Ethiopia and the 3 children they lost in Sudan. They say that the children they lost in Sudan is more traumatic for them because it didn't have to happen. It didn't have to happen. If Israeli government would send people quicker to rescue them, maybe they could have been here. They died only because of the dream to get to Jerusalem. So I can tell my parents' trauma from Sudan obviously is due to the children they lost and the unnecessary death of them. Further, after arriving in Israel, the survivors had to cope with the natural difficulties of immigration due to the intercultural transition from one community and economic structure to another. Thus, effects were magnified by the fact that their loss and traumatic experience was not recognized or treated. This is the second thing I said before. When they arrived here, nobody asked them like, what have you been through, or nobody offered a treatment. Nobody could treat them because they have a different language. Here, it's the first massive aliyah from Ethiopia, so there weren't here people that could treat them with education. They can talk Amharic too. So they hold these post-traumatic syndromes in the house. They didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about what they lost. They felt guilty. They felt like maybe they could maybe wait until Israel can organize this operation better, maybe wait until they're like in Operation Solomon, they come through Addis Ababa. So they felt that maybe if they would wait, their children would be here. So this is one thing that gave me the motivation to research what they've been through and what influence it have in my life and my generation life. When I started the research, I had to first look what researchers people did before. So several studies have demonstrated the exposure of Ethiopian refugees to multiple traumatic experiences pre, peri, and post-migration. The goal of the study was to examine the long-term effects of those stressful experiences and traumas, looking at the second generation. Close and extended contact with trauma victims might expose offsprings to secondary traumatization. Previous studies have documented the long-term effects of different traumas. However, how the transmission of trauma eventually reflects in young adulthood and how it shapes young adult behavior toward their parents and family has not been studied sufficiently. That's the reason why I decided to do that. When I started the research, I had a meeting with my professor, Professor Miri Sharp. So she asked me, what do you feel? How do you feel that the relationship with your parents is influencing your current life? Like when are the moments that you feel your mother in conversation or decision that you make? Or back then I was single. I couldn't, I just felt I couldn't have a healthy relationship with guys. I felt like I was very anxious. I couldn't let somebody in. I couldn't, I felt like it's the relationship with my parents is reflecting in my relationship with the other gender. So I told her these things. So we started to build the research model, and we started to look for variables so we can. She asked me, what do you suppose we will find? What the hypothesis that you think you need to research, and you will find it in your generation. And then we started to build it. We thought about various variables, and then we decided to focus in these ones. So first of all, we assume that our parents have a post-traumatic stress disorder. We find a few researches that indicate that they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And then we learned that, like I said before, that even though you haven't been exposed to the traumatic incident, you still can suffer from the disorder. If you constantly living with a person that suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, you're starting to feel like him. We can find researches that indicated that doctors and nurses and psychiatrists can suffer from secondary traumatization. The phenomenon is called like that. And also, we wanted to examine the perceived parents' trauma. We wanted to see if one person perceived that his parents suffer from trauma is different from one person that said, I don't really see they have any problem. So we took those two variables, and we wanted to see the relationship between them and differentiation of self-compassion, and well. Pardon?
Somebody's not muted. Can you
No,
please,
but if the Kleins are in Jerusalem or,
please mute?
no,
Somebody's not muted. Oh, here, there. No, that's Moria. That she's. Okay, sorry, Moria. I think we've muted everybody.
So we examine secondary traumatization and perceived parents' trauma and their association with differentiation of self-compassion and well-being. Also, we examine the potential role of attachment styles in moderating or mediating the relationship between all the variables. I will explain each one of them in a while. We assume that attachment style, it's the way how one person connects with his mother or the caregiver. We assume that it can be associated with secondary traumatization and perceived parents' trauma, and then in turn he can feel less compassion, less self-compassion. It can feel how it reflects on his well-being. So this is how we built this model. This is the hypothesis more clearly. And the findings. Before we talk about the findings, I want to explain a little bit about the variables. So, differentiation of self. In this variable, we chose to take one thing. It's called I position. I felt like whatever I had to decide or whatever I had to, when I have to make a big decision, like where to go to university or who to date, or every big decision in my life, I had to consider what my parents will feel about it because of all they went through. So I told my professor that I felt that, and we searched for a variable that will show it. So it said how well individuals generally function in relationship, and differentiation of self. They say that you can differentiate yourself from the other, from your family origin in general, but also how can you make your own decision without letting other people's opinion or your parents' opinion to interfere in that decision. And I felt like the boundaries between me and my parents and what they feel are very, very thin. And every decision, I can tell that I chose my husband based on what my mother felt about him. Like I couldn't marry my husband if my mother wouldn't feel comfortable around him. So every decision in my life was based on how they feel. And I assume that it's related to what they've been through, that they lost children. I felt that I had to make them happy and make them proud because of their grief and what they've been through. And this is one of the variable. The second variable, compassion, we decided to pick it because I told her, like, I feel like the story of my parent make me feel more compassion to people. I feel my parents losing children and suffering all of the journey. It made me feel more compassion to people problems, to hunger of people because of the hunger they've been through. I feel like I'm more sensitive to people, and this is why we pick compassion. Self-compassion is the ability to feel compassion for yourself, like when you fail, or when you think you did something bad, or when you're going through a bad time, to feel compassion and forgive yourself for things you've done. And this variable, I thought it's, as long as we found out that a person have more secondary traumatization, the less he will feel self-compassion for himself. This is what I thought. This is my hypothesis. And then in general, I told her that my well-being is effect of all my parents been through, that I barely saw him smiling, that I always felt like my mom is sad, and my dad was always in work, like he had to forget what he'd been through. So I tell her that I was treated, I'm suffering for anxiety, and am treated in with the psychology department in the university. And I told her, I think that this is the main variable that I wanted to research. So then she explained to me about her story, being second generation of Holocaust survivors. My professor, she told me her parents lost all of their family in Poland, and she hear me, and she know how I feel, and she know how it feels to grow up like this. And this is why she picked me to be my mentor. And this was a journey for both of us. And not all the things we thought we will find, we did find, but this is research. You're not always right. This is the findings. So as we hypothesized, secondary traumatization and perceived trauma of the parents was positively associated with insecure attachment pattern, anxiety, avoidance, and disorganization. These patterns, like I said before, when a baby grow up with a mother who suffer from unresolved grief or depression or anxiety, so the baby will be more anxious, or he will feel like he needs to avoid feelings, or he will develop it's called disorganization. When a person feel like he need you to be close to him, and in the same time he's pushing you away. This is disorganization. This is where I think I am. As we did the research in the other people, I checked myself, and I see that I have the tendency to want people to be close to me and want to feel loved and love them. But in the same time, I feel like if they come close, they can hurt me, or I just pull them away. So it was very interesting to see if my generation suffered from the same problem. There was also a negative correlation between secondary traumatization and mental well-being, which means that high levels of secondary traumatization are associated with lower levels of well-being and high levels of distress. However, the parents' perception of trauma was not associated with this variable. In addition, in contrast to the hypothesized, we didn't find a relationship between secondary traumatization and differentiation of self. The association between secondary traumatization and compassion was found to be very close. According to this estimate, secondary traumatization was associated with the perceived trauma of the parent and self-compassion. However, contrary to the estimate, a positive correlation was found between these variables. In other words, high levels of secondary traumatization, and when the parents are perceived as more traumatic, the self-compassion increases. It's contrary of what I thought, that because you are so busy all the time feeling compassion for other people and for your parents, so you wouldn't feel self-compassion. But I discovered the opposite. I discovered that despite all of that, people in my generation still feel self-compassion. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. I was happy to find out. I was interested also, to see if there's gender differences. I wanted to see if there are differences between men and women. The only difference I saw, I found that women feel more compassion toward the world. This is something that we can see in various studies that have been done before, that women are more compassion, and this was a surprise. In addition to collecting and analyzing the empirical data, the study included a semi-structured interview with 6 participants, half women, in order to learn about the trauma of their parents as perceived by them, to understand how they construct their experiences under these circumstances, and to enable a deeper examination of their coping. For me, this was the most interesting part of the research. I was glad I had the opportunity to go and talk to people of my generation and ask them, first of all, what do you know about what our parents went through? What do you hear in your house? How do you felt growing up with parents that lost children, or their parents, or their cousins, or the brothers. I wanted to know, I guess I wanted to not feel alone in these feelings. And I wanted to open the subject because it's like there's, I don't know how it's said in English, קשר שתיקה.
קשר שתיקה, I think would be,
כאילו מין שבועה כזאת ביניהם, קשר שתיקה של הדבר הזה.
an emotional gap, right?
לא, like they...
Or, wait, I'm gonna tell you.
Emotional connection, no?
לא, קשר שתיקה.
Wait, I'm gonna tell you what it is, just a second.
It's like they have an oath to be silent about all they've been through. Our parents.
Wait a second.
It's just a void. It's a void.
It's like a code of honor between them, like to
Yeah.
avoid control.
They decided they will never talk about what happened in Sudan.
Yeah.
They will never
Yeah.
talk about it with their children. I remember my father was very angry with my mother that she told me all about what they've been through. It's like my professor said in the Holocaust, they swore they will never talk about it. It's like, you can't touch the subject without someone like very angry about you. So I was glad I had this opportunity to go and talk with my generation. I put this picture here of father and his son because from Operation Moises, because all the interviews I did with them, all of them almost told me that they can tell their father has post-traumatic syndrome. Like they feel they have no relationship with their father. They live with him, but the father never asks them how they're doing, what about work, what about the girlfriend. Like they're not interested in their personal life. They get up in the morning, they go to work, they maintain the family, they bring money, but they don't have a close, intimate relationship with their kids. And this is one of the things that I personally didn't experience. My father is very, my father is very warm and very, like, till day we have a very close relationship. But especially the guys that I interviewed told me like their most close relationship is with their mother, but with their mothers. But their fathers, I like, one told me, it's like a plant in the house, she told me. He get up in the morning, he go to work, he come home, he never asks me how I am and how I feel. He never hugs me, he never kisses me, he never show emotions. Someone else said that if my father is asleep and you come behind him and touch him, he can punch you because he's scared, because he thinks that someone is coming for him. And one other interesting thing I discovered, and painful fact, that men that came to Israel and weren't under the age of 35 was took to the army with a weapon. In the emotional state that they were, they suffer hunger and diseases, and they come here and immediately was sent to the army. This I didn't know it because my father came here, he was already 46, I think, so he didn't went. But my generation, my father is the old father. אני לא יודעת איך להגיד את זה, שכאילו באופן יחסי הוא אבא מבוגר.
Yeah, you're just saying that your father was older than a lot of other fathers because he had you so late in life.
Yeah. So they go to the army and they serve a full time, and they had to, I think they had to disconnect from their feelings so they could move on and they could adapt to live here. And I can tell that all of us, our generation, are called in Hebrew names. They wanted to forget from Ethiopia. They wanted to forget the language. They wanted to forget the culture. So we all are given Hebrew names. And we are not talking very well Amharic. So I discovered a lot of things in the interviews that were like confirmation for me that it's not only me who went through this, that it's not only me that felt that my parents are always sad and there is no joy in our house. Now my goal is to continue my research, go to PhD, to continue the research in do another one, and then I want to discuss. Now I'm a mother. I have a baby. So what I want to find out now is how the experience my parents went through can affect my parenting style. This is what I want to reach the research next. I can feel, I did a work on myself. I feel like I less anxious than my mother, of course. And I try to raise my baby with a smile and with joy. I know how important it is. And I want to show him as less as fear as I can. I grew up with a lot of fear around me. So this is something that I'm working on each day. And I want to see if my generation feel the same in their parenting style.
Oh yeah, that's wow. I think there's a lot of questions. Can you stop your screen share there so we can have a full
Yes.
face of you? And then I just wonderful. I'm going to look in the chat, but people, there's a lot of questions already. I have a lot of questions. And I encourage everyone to share your questions in the chat or raise your hand. I'm got Moria on the main screen, so maybe the chat is better because I'm not sure I'm going to see everybody's hands up. The first question that Bruce Berman asks are, what are the similarities and differences between what the Ethiopian second generation experienced and what the second generation of other groups that immigrated to Israel under traumatic or oppressive conditions? So each story is unique. You mentioned the Shoah, but we know that the Yemenites had a traumatic story, others. So what do you know about the similarities and differences in the Ethiopian experience to other Israeli immigration?
Okay, I didn't study it empirically in my study. I will tell my personal opinion, if it's okay.
Of course.
I talked about it with my professor. She told me they experienced the same things and she feel me. But there's some things she couldn't understand, I feel. It's not the same when your parents have are olim hadashim. They don't talk the same language that you talk. Like now that I'm a parent, wow, I grew up with a mother that speaks one language and I speak another language. She didn't understand me most of the time, and I didn't understand her most of the time. Like language, it's the most basic thing that in common that you have with your child. So this is one thing. Second thing, as a woman, it was very difficult for me having a mother that came, she was married in 12 years old. She, by the time she came to Israel, she already had 9 children. She had her first child in 16. Like that's things that till now we have a lot of argument. Like she doesn't, when I was having a bad time having my child, she was like, in your age, I already had 10 kids. So why are you complaining? It's like two different worlds, me and my mom. And I feel that other groups maybe don't have these things. Like you can see immigrants in the United States or a Holocaust that came here, but they have the same language. I think it make it easier. You can talk to your mom and she will understand what you're saying. So, and another big thing, it's the color issue. We're Black people in a white country. And when they saw us, we were like monkeys. They didn't understand because it's the first massive aliyah here from Ethiopia. So they didn't see other Black people. They didn't believe there are Jewish, there are Black. They wanted our parents to make Brit Milah again. They wanted our parents to do Giur lechumra, it's called Giur lechumra. So my father tells me that they had this 3 days, they didn't eat, they sat in Jerusalem and they protested against the racism and why are the government want us to do Giur lechumra and why they don't believe we're Jewish. We went through all that we went through. And now that we are here, like my father tells me, I lost 3 children to be here. And now they don't even believe that I'm Jewish. So why I did all I did? Like, I think they were hurt the most because all the things that they went through here. So I think this is another big issue and difference.
Very interesting. Sue Hunting asks, she's wondering if you see or observe your parents interacting differently with your child than they do or did with you. So like that, first generation to third
Yeah.
generation.
I can tell that I warned my mother to not be so anxious about my child. It didn't help. When I live like 800 meters from her. I live right 1 street from her. So when the pandemic started and we couldn't see the elderly people, she was like depressed and that she can't see my baby. And then when we was isolated because I was exposed to a sick person, she didn't slept in night. She can pass like 3 days without sleeping because she's worrying about what's happened to me or my child. It's crazy.
Still a struggle.
Yeah.
It sounds like she's trying. Harvey asks, have you given your own child a Hebrew name?
No.
No.
I gave him, my parents gave him an Amharic name. And I didn't do it because I felt like when I was pregnant, one Ethiopian teenager was killed by the police here in Israel. So I felt like I have a boy, he's Black, he will look dangerous enough without having a weird name. Like I felt like I need to make him as Israeli as I can for his own sake.
Interesting. Yeah. The next question that I wanted to ask is, do you have any experience or knowledge of how second generation Ethiopians in the army have been experienced by their have been influenced by their parents' experiences. Terry, Minin, Asset, like you mentioned, the first generation coming in immediately into the army and the trauma of that and the lack of preparation. And how has that, from what you know, either personally or through your research, how has the army experience been influenced by the parents' experience?
I don't think there's an association between the experience. What I can tell in general about the statistics that a lot of Ethiopian young people go to the army. They are very they want to serve the country. It made them feel like they belong, and I went to the army myself, and I enjoyed a lot. My daughter went to the army last week, and this is something that I think make us feel like we belong to the society.
So I'm going to ask a question, and while people put more in the chat, but it seems like the research that you've done is like the, as they say in English, the tip of the iceberg, the very, very first layer of a lot of work that's going to be important to do over time. You're obviously interested in doing more through pursuit of your PhD. I'm interested in how whether your work already is being used in some way in Israeli society. It's informing how government agencies or social workers or others are
not yet.
And what would you want to see?
Not yet, because I had my child 1.5 years ago. So I was dedicated to him, and we had this pandemic, and now is when I start to talk about it, like I'm doing here, and I will start writing about it in science magazines and stuff. I'm willing to do it now.
Fantastic. It seems like really, really important.
It's very important.
Critical work, and so many more questions than even you were able to answer yet. Here's a question by my friend Stephanie, who's with me at my party.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Were there any services offered to the immigrants from the Israeli government in not just by putting them in the army, but help with language, help with customs, help with culture? Was there anything available?
There was an ulpan so they can study Hebrew, and there was a מרכזי קליטה, סוכנות היהודית, but they fell with it because those time when it was the 80s, there wasn't many people who can speak Hebrew and Amharic.
Yeah.
It was the first aliyah, so it was very difficult to teach them. All they needed to my parents don't speak Hebrew till now. So I think the government failed, but I don't think they have any other option. Like, they just don't have the staff to do it better.
Did it improve in later years when more?
I think it did. I can tell that my big brother, a firstborn, his name is Adane Tadela. He came from Sudan when he was 16. Now he's the head of the group sent to Gondar to bring new olim to Israel. So he personally is working with the Ethiopian immigrants that are coming now, and he's the manager of Merkaz Klita in Kiryat Gat. So he's doing both jobs. He's now 51, and he feels like it's his destiny. He had to do it. He went through hell, and he wanted other people to have like a smooth path to Israel. And now the latest Aliyah, Tzur Israel, So he is the head of the Sochnut HaYehudit group that are there and bringing all the immigrants that are still there.
Fantastic. Judy Newman asks, do you believe that second generation Ethiopians feel a connection to each other? Is there like, do you get together socially? Do you talk about your experiences? You know, I guess I would add, are most of your friendship groups within the Ethiopian community or within Israeli, more general Israeli society?
I can talk for myself that most of my friends are a second generation of Operation Moises. Until I met my husband, I never dated a man that his parents weren't like come from Operation Moises. Like I felt I had this connection, and only a guy that his parents went through the same could understand me. Then I met my husband he came from Sudan too, but he came later in '89, they come. So yes, I can feel like it's more easy for me to connect with people that I know their parents went through hell like my parents, but it's not something general. Not all of the people are like that. I have a lot of friends that are not even Ethiopians. So not all the people are like that, but not all my friends have parents that lost so many children. I think this is something that not happened in all families. So it's different.
I'm gonna ask one more question here, and then we're kind of getting to the end of the hour already. It went so fast, Maria. You had so interesting. So Jill Suskin asks, and I hope I'm interpreting her question correctly. Are there books and TV shows and movies that include Ethiopian Israelis that acknowledge the experience? I think within Israeli media, for adults or for children, is the story sort of now permeating?
There is, but there's a narrative. That is one of the reasons why I decided to do this research. The narrative that we always heard and that always speaks in the society, it's that the Mossad bring us here. They are the heroes. They are the ones who sacrifice and risk their lives. No show or no story or no book is talking about the real heroes, that our parents, they took their babies, pregnant women, and did this road and risked their lives and lost so many lives. 400 people died there. They went like 1,200 people, and 800 people died there, and 100 more people are lost, and nobody knows where they are till today. So I think they're the real heroes, and nobody talk about it. This one narrative that makes the Mossad the only heroes, and I think it's so sad. Like, they sacrifice so much. Nobody talks about it like that.
I have to say that as I was meeting with Nir to discuss this program, that was one of the key points, is to get other narratives to our ears and our awareness. I'm gonna ask Elizabeth Shapiro to ask her question, Liz, and then we'll say thank you and wrap up. Is that okay, Maria? Liz.
Okay.
Yes, hi. Actually, it's morphed into two questions. One is that there's a great deal of data now about epigenetic, about genetic changes of people who have gone through terrible trauma.
Yeah.
And my first question is whether or not there's any data in Israel about specifically Ethiopian Olim, whether or not there's been epigenetic or genetic changes due to the trauma they went through. The second question, I was in a Merkaz Klita in Tveria during Operation Moses, and I was privileged to be there when 120 new neighbors arrived from Ethiopia who'd gone through precisely what your parents went through. I have stories and memories of that, of things that they told me. But I do recall that in the year, at least in the next 3 years after Operation Moses, the suicide rate of people who went through Operation Moses was alarmingly high, especially in the Galil, in Sfat, and in Tiberia. The number of people who had survived that terrible trek from Gondar and Tigray to Sudan, and then made it to Israel, the number of adults who became clinically depressed and committed suicide was alarmingly high. And I'm just curious to know, and curious is not the right word, whether that rate of depression and suicides has continued amongst those who have made Aliyah in subsequent operations to come to Israel.
I will answer the both questions with the same answer. We don't know because we are not enough interesting for someone to look at us and examine this data. We are this small community of Black people that it's not, the public is not enough interesting, so someone will come and check if we have a genetic changes, or if we suicide more, or if we go to mental health care more. So I did the research because nobody did until I did it, because this is interesting for me. But I don't know someone out of the community that will be interested to research this topic. So the answer is no.
Well, there's Moria, we could spend the day with you. It's so interesting. You've really opened our eyes, I think, to a whole nother perspective of what's happening in Israel with the Ethiopian community. And clearly your work, you have a huge future ahead of you. We are going to follow you.
Thank you.
What you're doing is obviously of critical importance. So thank you again. Everybody is writing in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we
thank you all so much for listening.
And we'll stay in touch. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.